Other news, next week, budget week, and we've been looking at some of the big issues before Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan delivers his speech in Parliament on Wednesday. Let's get an overall view now of what we can expect, and we're joined by Lesiba Sishoka from Investment Solutions. Thank you for being with us, Lesiba. So 30 billion rand is the amount apparently that he would like to raise in terms of taxes. How significant is that? And do you agree that it won't be one tax, it'll be a whole lot?
It is quite an amount. It will require broad-based tax hikes. So it's expected that high-income earners are likely to actually pay a lot more. I won't be surprised if a higher bracket is introduced at the top end. We're now paying 41% for those who are earning a particular threshold. They could increase that to 43 with a new tax bracket. All the wealth-related taxes, capital gains, donations tax, all those are likely to go up too. Obviously, the obvious ones will include the fuel levy, which will increase, the sugar tax. It was proposed in the last year, and then they'll continue to make sure that's implemented now. It's a tax budget.
All right, so let's first look at the 43%. If that comes in, I mean, we're very high for that top wealth bracket compared to the rest of the world. Does that constitute a wealth tax in a sense that some have been calling for, or is there scope for even more?
Technically, it will remain a personal income tax. Not a wealth tax, but a personal income tax. But I'm saying,
is it in effect a wealth tax?
Well, it will be in a way. If you recall what happened at the World Economic Forum and the discussion that happened there, that increasingly there's high inequality, the rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer, and somehow in the middle there has been a problem that there isn't enough generated tax collections. I won't be surprised if it's introduced in that way, because we need 28 billion rands that needs to be raised, and I think it's an obvious one to think about.
All right, and the question is though, can the small pool of taxpayers handle more extraction? Admittedly,
the more you tax, the effect is in the later time, in the future, the collections could dwindle as output begins to come down. So tax could prove erosionary on future collections of tax. So while it's needed right now, I think much further taxes could prove detrimental to the economy from where we stand.
And the problem is we don't have growth.
Exactly. What needs to happen is we need to curtail expenditure and think more long-term in terms of structural reform that could be introduced to make sure that the potential of the economy to grow faster is increased. Right now we're talking about 2.5 potential growth. If we were at 3.5 towards 4, that could make a major contribution not only to tax collections, but to GDP growth that goes faster, and also helping the employment situation, which will pull more people in the labor force, increasing the potential revenue to the government.
What is within Pravin Gordhan's power there? Is there anything that you can do with a budget to help growth, or is he really just crunching the numbers for us?
Crunching the numbers is top of mind, and I do think right now there is no choice. There is a requirement to think about long-term growth in a more practical way. And the National Treasury provides a good platform to construct fiscal policy with long-term expectations of growth on structural reforms. It is an opportunity to be done here. We haven't seen much of it, I must admit. It needs to come through. There's no choice. We are having rating agencies still looking at us very closely. We need growth that can go up. But it's interesting that in the policy arena, the World Bank has written a very instructive report about SA, in it beginning to talk about perhaps to revitalize business confidence, which could lead into higher investments by the private sector. One needs to think about a tax package towards corporates. One wonders if such ideas will be taken into policy formulation.
And even all these ideas about transformation, about dealing with inequality, apparently the finance minister accused by our president of standing in the way of transformation by not by not approving a whole lot of big projects. But do you think it's the right stance still for the country to be very careful about the debt that we take on right now?
Debt, and there have been. If you think about the debt issue, it was in the last 3 budgets, effectively dealt by the authorities in fiscal policy. And in it, they confirm it has increased, but the outlook for the debt levels are likely to be falling, and they're consolidating that debt around 48% of GDP. I think that's top of mind. It remains top of mind, but one is somehow satisfied with the effort that has been given from the authorities around that debt. For that reason, rating agencies gave us a thumbs up, although there are warnings around structural reforms and higher GDP growth. But on the fiscal management of debt, even on issued debt with foreign currency, SA remains one of the best institution, in fact.
All right, so you said this was a tax budget, which isn't great for South African taxpayers. You mentioned the sugar tax. That's expected in some form, maybe not as high as he said. I don't know what you think about that. But more importantly, what about VAT? Because that's a huge revenue hit. Are we not being too precious around VAT? Because you can exclude a whole lot of items and make sure that those don't attract VAT for the poor.
Sure, VAT at 14%, it actually it's at the highest level. In Nigeria, VAT is 10%, right?
Okay, I thought we were actually relatively low, which is interesting.
No, we're sitting at 14. To increase it, what will happen is that, VAT, it comes in all transactions. If you're buying a house, you pay VAT. When you go to a store, there are some items that are exempt, but you're largely paying VAT. Every single transaction you enter will have a VAT consequence. Right now, what we're seeing is a cyclical recovery in GDP. In other words, there's an upswing in economic activity in South Africa. If we introduce a VAT, in my opinion, it could stall that recovery. And you go back to that growth that is between 0 and 0.5, which is undesired. And I don't think the authorities want to thwart the nascent recovery that is happening in the economy.
All right, we're running out of time. Any surprises expected, or will it be same old, same old?
Well, remember, certainty and stability is an important thing in policy formulation. I'm not expecting a huge amount of surprises here, which in itself is a good thing. You look at bond markets, you look at equity markets, even banks, despite all the issues that are happening, are holding their ground, just reflecting the certainty that we're expecting on Wednesday.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis, Lesiba Motata from Investment Solutions. Let's take a look at the numbers. Let's see how the markets performed today.